Allah, 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 Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome, greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us today to a third part of an uncommon dialogue between Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri and Dr. Sadiyya Shaikh. So on behalf of the Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri Foundation, I welcome you to this third part of the Sufi Cosmology of life. Through his writings and teaching, Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri has been sharing his experience and insights into what it means to be a human, referencing the timeless cosmology emerging from the scriptural Quran and its human embodiment, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the wisdom heritage that connects all the great spiritual luminaries from the Sufi tradition to the ever-converging confluence between science, consciousness, and spiritual metaphysics. Dr. Sadiyya Shaikh is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and her research is informed by her interest in Sufism and explores the intersections of ethics, gender, and justice, and tensions between the demands of politics and spirituality. In part one of this series, they discussed the macro view from meta-historical broad sweeps through history, the origins of the universe, matter and form, how human consciousness has evolved, the relationship between science and religion, the temporal and the eternal, and the deepening impact of the month of Ramadan that has just completed itself. In the second part, Dr. Sadiyya's questions started to telescope to the micro, connecting the polarizing events unfolding throughout the world today with the individual's journey. Recognizing the tensions between injustices and the failures of liberal democracies, their discussion probed the intersections between individual responsibility and what Shaykh Fadhlalla describes as the human drive to lead by the soul, to unify with its origin, light. Shaykh Fadhlalla emphasized that as all humans, we seek the same thing, the certainty that we are boundless, limitless souls, and therefore reverence for life is the foundation for all our humanity. It is impossible to do justice to the kaleidoscope of these topics, and so a third visit to specific questions, which Dr. Sadiyya Shaikh had, is being shared today. Dr. Sadiyya, over to you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Assalamu alaikum, Muna. And assalamu alaikum, beloved brothers and sisters. And thank you for this opportunity, Shaykh, to continue this conversation. Shaykh, now you said in the previous talk, that all of human crises are spiritual crises. And currently, we are indeed in a global crisis where there's a profound recognition of the brutality and racist violence experienced by Black people the world over. There's been a global outpouring of sorrow, of rage, of anger, and recognition in this last period over the murder of an African-American man, George Floyd, by the police in the US, who was literally killed by a policeman's knee on his neck as he cried out, "I cannot breathe." Similarly, not just in the US, but in South Africa, there have been a number of murders of poor Black people by army or by police during the lockdown. Colin Corsa, Sibusiso Amos, and a number of others. And there's huge anger at the disparity between how middle-class people and wealthy people have been treated in South Africa, where they're left alone pretty much with no real surveillance, and how poor, which are mostly Black South Africans, are subject to harassment, violence, and even murder. Apparently, there's been about 12 deaths due to police action during lockdown in this period. And this incident with George Floyd has really, in some sense, catapulted global consciousness around the most extraordinary violences faced by people. Some people have referred to it as the last straw on the camel's back, the kind of intense visual exposure that this event has gotten has triggered this global outpouring of rage and intense debates on violence and dehumanization of racism as it's experienced in particular by Black people the world over, but also by people of color. And this debate, I think, extends beyond just the question of murdering people to how people are constantly subject to racism as it's alive and impacts people every day. And this is not just a question, I mean, within Muslim communities and within all communities, there is pervasive racism, which people don't want to recognize. And it's time that people are needing to both recognize racism for the evil that it is and to attend to some kinds of transformations. And the transformations need to be simultaneously internal and external. And some of these incidents resonate with your statement during one of your recent talks that globally humanity is in a very dark place and that we have to come out of this darkness. You said we have to read this darkness and emerge from it. So in this moment, I want to ask for your reflections in this moment of global political and spiritual crisis. You've invoked in one of your talks that very beautiful Quranic ayah that actually invokes the Talmudic teaching that whosoever kills one life kills the world, and whoever saves one life saves the entire world. So please, Sheikhna, can you help us to read in this time with spiritual acuity and with guidance of how to emerge from this space with deep transformations both within the self and in the world, within the individual and within the social and political?
It's quite mysterious that every time human beings reflect upon individual or societal situation, we think it is the most important time and the most critical time. It's a very amazing human thing from the beginning of our journey, 50, 100,000 years ago, when the emergence of whatever we call now is the Adamic blueprint or Homo sapiens. The story is that we are here undergoing a constant shift in consciousness. The individual consciousness and the collective one of 100,000 years ago is very different from 50,000, from 1,000 years ago. There is an evolution that is moving on and on towards its destiny, which is not separate from its origin. At all times, any human being with a bit of conscience, with a bit of heart, as you may call it, or a bit of reflectiveness or whatever, you find we are concerned about injustice. And injustice moves on and on and on. 100 years ago in the United States, injustice was if you don't allow people to sit in the bus together. And now it had become, don't press your knee on somebody's neck because you will kill them. But who is on my neck? It's my own ego, my own illusion, my own fantasy of myself. So that is why every one of us is suffering from inability to breathe properly. I'm not saying we should not denounce visible injustices and abusiveness. We should do that. But at the same time, what is the root of injustice? It must be deeper than we can discern in our mental or emotional or, if you like, moral type of evaluation. Injustice is seeing two without their origin being one and their destiny being also one. Every human being you talk to are confused. No human being, no matter what, even after a few minutes of their success in whatever they consider to be success, a few minutes after that, you find they're already caught into another web that drives them to overcome obstacles, difficulties, and so on. It's endless. So how can I be in a state where I have an inner peace or tranquility from which I can bounce off my emotional ups and downs in order to remain steady whilst responding to the outer world? Otherwise, if I'm just absolutely immovable, so is the stone. So we have to connect with the outer world. We have to accept immediate outer mistakes and wrongdoings. But where is the touchstone where I, you, he, and she need to constantly recalibrate with? So as we immediately move along the hierarchy of the so-called struggles as human beings, we have to exercise, unavoidable. Now, what is the point of us speculating and sitting comfortably here about police brutality. What about my own brutality against people my next door, this or that, or who I'm addressing? And so there is a hierarchy. It becomes very academic and very remote if I'm all the time thinking of the big issues, like the fellow when they asked him, why is it you are so happy with your wife? He said, I only tackle the big issues, such as which country we should go to, or whether we should send a woman now to the moon or not. These are the big issues I am responsible to tackle. My wife decides where are we going to live, how many children we have, what is my job. All of these unimportant issues, my wife decides. So we are in good state. So you have to refer it to a standard that will not make you or others regret or feel guilty about later on, which comes to the issue of presence. If you're presence, then you are touching the timeless. The present moment has emerged from the so-called flow of time and will move to the next. But if you are present, then you are touching the eternal. And then you have no fear of death. And then you have no going back and forth in time, regretting what you said, what you did. You're present. Presence is complete. Presence is absolute. Presence is the divine light, but it gets diluted, so you have a faint memory. Oh, I'm not sure if I did that 10 years ago. And if I did, well, if you're sensible enough, please excuse me, I was beside myself. That day I had a sack in the job and I was insecure, so I was beside myself. Where were you beside yourself? Who else is there other than yourself? To get back to Dr. Sadiyya's question, the issue is perfect balance, and that's where justice is. Perfect balance is only in the moment. Once it appears, it has a flavor of the past and it has concern about the future. So the moment is now in between. So it is approximate. That's why human life is approximate. And that's why we have so many different levels of consciousnesses. Within each level, there are strands of consciousnesses. Your dream consciousness is not just one fixed block. Point of entry into the dream, in it and after it. And so there are so many different strands and so many different levels. It's all a practice for me to stop the illusion of being separate from the perfect moment eternally. That is from where injustice arises. I see myself separate from my mother, or from him, or from my neighbor, or from my enemy. The Quran says, not until that which is between you and whom you had enmity, there is nothing other than great friendship. Not until then you can enter into the house of justice. So the shift is going on in human consciousness is constantly rising towards higher level of justice, higher level of consciousness, higher evolution. It's work in progress. We must celebrate it. Equally, we must also go against all of the other ripples. The rise in consciousness is constant. There is an arc. But within that arc, there are circles that comes down and up, down and up. So every 10, 20, 50 years, you find there has been a very big downshift. As we consider also the global scene in humanity, there is an increased darkness, an increased digression and distraction in acquisition or power or being in control or whatever, or dominate and so on. These are the sicknesses. We don't have enough reverence for life itself. So naturally, we also don't have enough reverence for human life. So we are not on that precise, if you like, divine point of total accountability, responsibility, and awareness. If we are, then we are to celebrate. We are all the time celebrating false, if you like, occasions. Every party, everything, let's celebrate. Before the party ends, everybody is more miserable because they know it ends and they're no longer, participating in this illusion. We have to read it with total honesty, and you will find the only capital you have is access to the moment. That is the ultimate asset. And that's what the Quran says. It was this gift, we offered it on the heavens and the mountains. They couldn't take it. It's a treasure beyond treasure. But we're all the time chasing pebbles. Why? Because this ultimate treasure is in a glass cup full of mud and muck and other stones. So it got mixed up. That's the case with every human being. The ruh is mixed up with so many other different, darknesses that you don't know who are you. Say, I was beside myself. Well, tell me the one that you were beside. This is what is the story.
Thank you, Shaykh. You also noted in your last book that we're living in a critical time. For the next 5 to 7 years are crucial. Can you expand on this? What did you mean by that? That the next 5 or 7 years are critical?
It is my own personal reading of it. It's very subjective and it's personal. I think we have been, for the last 20 years, with the excesses, if you like, of playing the market, allowing the market to rule, allowing all of this magic that we play with the value of money and the value of blips in computers, which gets more and more and more zeros put onto it. My evaluation is that for the last 20 odd years, we have been diverting from calibrating the full spectrum that we are. We have more and more began to judge things. How much does it cost? What is the money of it? And if I have more money, then I'm more powerful than you, then you have to be subservient to me, and so on and so on. This trend has been continuing, and therefore, like everything else, I think it will begin to move out of it in time with suffering, with a lot of regrets, with a lot of bloodshed and tear shed. So that's why I think maybe another decade before we come out of this excessively dark period, in which I'm sure most people who are middle class, above moderate income and so on, during this lockdown, I am certain that many, many people will suddenly look in their bedroom and their cupboard. They look, my God, why do I have so many shoes? What do I, with all of these shirts, what do I do? Because here you can't show it off to anybody. You can't use it much. So for one, I've noticed. So we don't need all of this. We need silence. We need recalibration. We need inner joy that cannot be tarnished with fear or sorrow. That's why we are out of calibration. And with suffering, with constantly, if you like, facing this cul-de-sac, I think we will come out of it. There is an arc of rising consciousness from thousands of years. Inna Allah balighun amrah, the Quran says. Allah will attain His order, His design, His wish. What is His wish? Is to be known. How? Through ibadah. What is ibadah? To be obsessed with that which is eternal, ever present, not subject to space and time. This is the deen of Muhammad.
Thank you, Shaykh. You mentioned in a recent talk that the cosmos and creation all started with love. Even the dualities of existence manifest love in varying beings, is what you've said. So my question here is, what is the relationship between love and justice? How do we bring love and justice into our readings of the context? There's a Quranic verse, Surah Al-Nahl, that says, and we hear this every Friday in the Jummah, Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhakum la'allakum tadhakkarun. And in this verse, the very first of the virtues is adl, the more generic, and from there flows the beauty. And so this foregrounding of adl, and I'm asking around this relationship between love and beauty and justice. and how we bring those readings of love and justice into our times, our moment, both individually and socially.
There are a dozen or so forces in life that every one of us is subjected to them, obviously, subconsciously, and many other ways. Love is one of them. Love is a unifying force which has in it a dozen, if not more, diluted version. The most powerful one is obsession. So until I'm obsessed with the moment and its absoluteness, unless I'm obsessed with the absolute, then I get obsessed with something else, with the relationship, with family, with a house, with power, with showing off, with whatever. We are, as human beings, have to connect to other things. We are not in isolation. So love describes unifying, if you like, tunnel or a field of energy that connects, that unifies. So it is through love that the mother is willing to die for the baby, which is because of life, love for life, not her life. She's willing to give up her life for life that is continuing, that's perpetual, the new life. So love, knowledge, there are about a dozen such, if you like, forces. Knowledge, it connects cause and effect. I know, therefore I'm at peace now. I didn't know how these things connected. I didn't know why were they quarreling, but obviously it's the same thing they both wanted, and it is one thing, it's one bar of gold. They didn't know how to break it, so they broke each other's head. These are the forces that drives us towards what we consider to be worthwhile or what is beneficial. So ultimately, what is the beneficial? The ultimate benefit is to be in the now, dealing with the past and the future, but without losing my foothold into the perfect now. If I lose that, then I become emotionally swept and have a slogan and start screaming and shouting as though that is going to bring justice. Justice is willingness to be honest. Where did you get your life from? Where is the honesty in that? It's my life. He touched me and he's about to kill me. As I said, I am the ultimate criminal, having the knee of my heavy ego on my own neck. And then I'm screaming. And then God provides me with the physical, human, material example of abusiveness of each other. Not until I regard somebody else as exactly as me. I am partial, and by being partial, I am unjust. So injustice increases with my birth. Until I am aware that in truth, in the absolute sense, there is no distance, there is no time, and there are no twos. And the twos and duality is necessary in my schooling in the sphere of duality in this world to realize the master of unity, the cosmic governance of the world. Before it began, while it's still continuing, and also after the Big Bang, ends with the collapse. That is justice.
Sorry, we had a little bit of interruption on the sound. Shaykh Fadhlalla? Sadiyya, would you want to respond?
Yes. Shaykh, my question still remains, how is it when I physically have a knee on my neck as a black man or as a woman who's being beaten up by her husband during lockdown where there's no reprieve anywhere? It is a very difficult space when you are the recipient of the oppression from other human beings for you to be able to calibrate to the present moment and the higher. It's impossible to, you once said, in fact, that it's very hard to go into meditation if you're hungry. And if you are, so Sheikh, I completely appreciate the entire cosmology within which you're framing much of these questions. But I'm asking from the perspective of those who are receiving the brunt of violence, of how to calibrate when actually there is a physical knee on your neck killing you.
You have to resist it. You have to be honest for that moment. And we are all loyal to preserving life within ourselves. You have to resist it. You have to demonstrate against it. You have to run away from it. You have to curse it. You have to, or whenever is needed, also stand up against it in every possible way, individually and collectively. You can't pontificate, as you said. If you're in pain and in hunger, you can't talk about the philosophical issues of do you have freedom or is everything preordained? It's impossible. I say, give me some food now. So you have to have the right perspective. And we move up on that hierarchy of perspective. And you have to be honest as to where you are. You can't expect from a 4-year-old child to understand the overall situation economically and politically in the whole country. You know, a child is much more interested in the immediate, And as they grow with intelligence, then they don't mind postponing pleasure for another day or two or so, especially provided they are promised to get more. So you grow with intelligence and with action. So you have to be honest to the moment. Of course, I had to slap him or curse or shout or whatever, or plead. No doubt. There is a hierarchy in each one of us. Its foundation is preserving, prolonging quality life.
Thank you, Shaykh. Shaykh, in one conversation which I had with you personally, you provided a truly profound reading on Surah Al-Asr, where you said, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And you've called those the 4 pillars of the Qibla of the heart. Those who believe, the first pillar is belief, and the second, to do good works, and the third one, with reference to the haqq, to truth, and who are in a state of patience, with no expectation of the outcome of your good actions. Please, Shaykh, I personally found that an extremely valuable teaching, and I was hoping that you could elaborate and share with our audience your reflections on this Surah Al-Asr as the 4 pillars of the Qibla of the heart.
We are very fortunate nowadays in that our basic education across the whole world has risen so considerably that the issue of the vertical connecting with the highest is far, far, far more dominant than the horizontal. What do the neighbors say? What do this? So we know by science that the unknown is vast, 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 vast. Whatever it is, 90, 95, 98% of whatever there is in the universe. And then we give it names and we change these names, dark matter or this matter. It doesn't matter. All what it says is that what we don't know is immense. So this is what the start of the surah is. A human being is born into an immense, if you like, state of unknown, uncertainty, and darkness. And within us, there is a drive to know. That's why knowledge is a big, big, big glue of unifying diverse things. I now know this chemical thing with the other thing produces this new, if you like, product, and so on. So at all times, human beings, as a human being, not as a soul, I as a human being, I am a connection, an amalgamation between the infinite light of my soul, which is beyond measure, and the identity that begins with birth and ends with death. So I am insan. Insan is an admixture of a spiritual entity and a physical, ever-changing, ever-growing, ever-evolving, definable reality. So this entity, the so-called I, is half and half right, half wrong. half left, half right. And also, well, at all times, whatever I aspired for, whatever I prayed, whatever I will come to an end. I will come to an end. So that's the end. So I will, at the end of it, I will come to nothing. You know, the body is left back to where it came from, material issue and chemical thing, and the emotions and so on, and the mind also evaporates into the intermediate stage, and the spirit or the soul belongs to another world that we are unable to define, to discern, or to discuss. So at all times I will lose. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, unless I am is insurance, unless I am reliant and I trust that the unknown, the infinite of the unseen is such that it is under perfect governance. You may call it the quantum field, you may call it a great divine controller, whatever name you give it. It is in charge. So that is Amn. I am certain, I am at ease, I am confident, I rely upon that from the unknown, from the unseen, whatever comes has its perfection. May not be what I had hoped for, may not be what I consider in my narrow mind and perspective to be perfect. But in the cosmological sense, it is perfect, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. Now, I, as an individual with my limited perspective, I have to stand up against injustices, abusiveness, etc., out of balance. So we are here constantly seesawing in balance. Food, good health is good. But if you give too much attention to it, also it has its downside. And on and on and on. It is middle path. So, amanu wa amilu salih. Now, I trust that if I am questionable as a human being at all times, the rest is not in my hand. I do my best and trust in the rest. Then, amal salih, do your best accountably. Why did you do that? Was it because you wanted more attention, more accolade, more what, more wealth? What is it you wanted? If you're honest about that, then you're all the time having a most wonderful balanced moment that is so clear and sharp, more so than a laser. Because none of these fluffs or distractions are affecting you. You're completely present in the core of your real soul, which is eternal. So you're here constantly calibrating with the divine in you. Amal salih is, why did you do this, not that? Why did you favor A, not B? Why did you run at a time that you had to stay still? Why? What is the? What was your inner motive? If your inner motive was calibrated with the absolute light in you, then you will have no blame, you have no claim, and you will have no guilt. In other words, you will have a lot of criticism. Why did you do this in so-and-so time and so-and-so date? If you were present in that moment, in your inner core, you would repeat the same thing if the same circumstances come back again. So you have no guilt. It doesn't mean you have no conscience. It just means that you were present at that moment. Now, not most of us are present at all times. You are sometimes in a rush, sometimes you have a bit of a, out of balance emotionally, physically, materially, or your kidney has been screaming or something. So you're not all the time physically, chemically, emotionally, but are in that state of equanimity. So you make allowance for this. Please excuse me, I was, at that time, I had a hiccup in my life. The morning my wife decided, I'm going to divorce you without any expectations, So, this was a small hiccup. So you have to be honest. If you're not in balance at these different hierarchical levels, you are not calibrating. Your actions are going to be highly suspect, and you may regret most of them. This is amal salih. The ultimate action is that you're doing it with no fear, no expectation of outcome. You have no option other than do that. And you are free then. So your actions free you rather than get you more and more into a close, output, output, output. This is the downside of the cycle of the last 2-3 decades. Outcome, outcome, outcome. Do you actually own this building? Yeah, I own it, but now it's a huge bind on me. Nobody's going to rent it. Nobody wants it. I have owned 6 of the big cruise liners. 20 years ago, the industry was moving like anything. So if you owned even quarter of the shares of a cruise liner of 1,000 bed nightmare, you consider yourself very wealthy. Can you imagine now if you were the owner of 5 cruise liners? Nobody allows them to even dock anywhere. Nobody wants them. And God knows whenever that miserable business of extra abusiveness of luxury and waste is going to start again. So Amal Salih, why did you do that? What calibration? Who was your... I had a good investment advisor. Great, fine. He made his commission and he's gone. And you are now lumbered with the debt. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. Remind each other that the truth is that the so-called you is only a tiny outer manifestation of the real you. The real you is a spark of the cosmic light. It's ever living. It is a reflection of life itself. Life is not yours. This so-called your life has began with the outer material, earthly event of birth. And the so-called your life will also end for you with death. But life continues. And this life of yours was not separate from the rest. It is an energy field. It's a cosmic energy. It has its own nature. It continues forever. And the Quran reminds us that this illusion that you're separate will be shattered on death. And you realize that you are not separate from the absolute truth. And this will remain with you until the end of the universe. That is why after your accountability, whether you are in paradise or in hell, it says it continues forever. So long as there is space and time, it appears to be forever. But as far as reality itself, the entire universe is a tiny little blip and is one of countless universes. So putting things in perspective, we have to remind each other with haqq, tawasaw bil haqq. Haqq is the eternal truth that has no beginning and no end, from which we emerge. By its courtesy, we are continuing in this bumpy journey to which we return. And then the last bit, timelessness, sabr. Sabr is timelessness. And look, in the Arabic is so wonderful. You have cactus. It has so many wonderful medicinal qualities and also the fruit of the cactus. But one of the words of it is same as sabr. Patience, because you drop it in the desert, it remains dormant for so many years, and whenever once every 50 years there is a bit of a moisture, it grows. Sabr. Sabr is stopping time. Be patient for a year. Be patient. What is 10,000 years between friends? We have emerged from billions of years. So be patient. It's fine. Watawasaw, meaning reminding each other, which means you need that circle or connectedness of like-minded, like-hearted people. And that is your real family, not always the biological family. The advice to us is acknowledge your biological family, وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا, and if they are really on your way towards your awakening, leave them in a pleasant way. Say, thank you very much, I'm leaving somewhere, whatever. Be gentle, be correct, but firm and strong. So at all times, no matter who it is, and living in Eskimo land or on the equator, human beings are the same. We have the eternal in us, and we have a biographical aspect, which is the so-called I. And the biological one, the mental one, imitates the qualities and the attributes of my ruh, which are all the great attributes, the ever-knowing, the ever-powerful, the ever-living, the ever-present, the most beautiful, and the shadow of it carries all the negative connotations of vices. That's why we try to teach the child, don't be mean, don't be impatient, don't be vulgar, don't blah, blah, blah. So as you begin to move from fear of being in the darkness, to the love of being in light. 2,000-3,000 years ago, people were living on the edge between life and death. So fear was the dominating force. Fear of loss of life, fear of being broken. Many, even of the great beings, even the pharaohs. So many of the great people that we had excavated and so on through archaeology and paleont, we find that there was a lot of violence, a lot of fear. Hardly any of them left this life without a hole in their head or somewhere else. We've come a long way. 100 years ago, where exactly I'm sitting now, a chief of the tribe could kill by his own whims. Before he lifted his head, they killed the person who annoyed him. Not anymore. We are now moving into the luxury of ease, comfort, and love, and connectedness, and tolerance, and the ability to see others exactly as you see yourself. Slightly different shape, different sex, different age, different experience. But there is sameness with certain amount of differentiation. So this surah is the most wonderful guide. If you are able to switch off, which is the last bit, sabr, stop time. You will stop anger. You will stop disappointment. You will stop a lot of waste of your energy. Switch off time. Leave it. It's not your share. Maybe 5 more generations, somebody else will do it. You've done what you can. Now, don't overdo it. You can't. It's a waste. Don't underdo it either. Be in the moment. You've done what you can. Then you have no regrets, no remorse. That's it. Presence.
Thank you, Shaykh. I think this beautiful reflection on the fact that we are all the same, even though we are distinctive in some kinds of ways, but to treat other lives as our own, and that we act with reference to truth and act righteously to the extent that we can perceive, but have no investment in the outcome. This notion of timelessness of sabr, have no investment of a particular outcome. As long as our intention is pure, we act with that purity and with as much as an openness we have to the higher that we can discern. We act from that niyyah, from that intention, and from that purity of focus. And then we surrender the outcome completely because it is not in our hands. And I think that's quite a powerful teaching to hold on to as we face challenges in the world, that we have to do what we have to do. We have to resist injustice. We have to create beauty to the extent, but it has to be in constant calibration to the higher, because everything can get distorted if it's not in that calibration. So thank you, Shaykh. I think that's enormously valuable to us. On that note, just to pick up something a little bit, last week I had asked you about the possible value of individuality on the spiritual path, and you had given this very exalted response, actually, which asked us to think of ourselves really as shedding earlier skins of ourselves, that our developmental path, spiritually, our developmental path is to lose the illusions of ourselves so that ultimately we can wake up to the cosmic light. We can be in presence in that moment of absolute presence. You said, don't deny your shadows, acknowledge them and move along. Don't be blocked by your mental image of yourself. Be bereft, be empty. However, my question, Sheikhna, is while we aspire to that adoration and absorption and complete loss of everything in the one, simultaneously, is there a real spiritual value to our distinctiveness? One of the things that I found quite beautiful in Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam is that each prophet is both that being completely absorbed in the light, the one who has totally surrendered the ego self, the one who is insan kamil, and yet each prophet is distinctive in terms of a particular divine quality that becomes most explicit or most apparent in their own personality. And this is such an exquisite balance between the universal and the particular. And so I'm asking you, what does it mean to embrace aspects of our unique nature, even as we yearn to dissolve into the higher, into the beautiful, into the one?
Brilliant. We cannot deny a certain specific touch of individuality. You can call it a flavor. In science, they give them all kinds of different names, including flavor, the way the atom turns. So each one of us, once there is individuality from the absoluteness, there are certain flavors which distinguish them. There is a special, fingerprint. There is a whatever, all of the other thing which distinguishes you as unique. It is like mimicking the unique oneness of the absolute reality. I want to go back for a second, this issue of doing it without any expectations. Only when it is beyond my immediate responsibility towards my house, my personal, physical, chemical, material, if you like, well-beingness. I cannot in any way deviate from the fact that I am obsessed with life, and obsessed with life meaning obsessed with my life, meaning that I expect good outcome when I am looking after my body or my mind or washing my face or eating. I expect outcome of good energy, good health. So that is unavoidable. But once it comes, I expect it upon others. So it becomes religious or spiritual fascism. I want you to have it. You can't do it. Everybody has to go through the same loop. When it comes to the flavor, it's a similar thing. I have to accept the color I have, or the parenting I had, or the culture from which I emerged. That, to have a lot of children or to have wealth, whatever, was an important thing for a leader. So I have to accept this was the color. This is from where I have emerged, But again, putting it in perspective, I find this was relating to me. So my vessel oozed also with a bit of all those colors. That's it. There's nothing more. But it is the end of the spectrum of humanity. And the other end of that spectrum is divinity itself, pure and simple, absolute. No time, no space, no limitation, God's light or God's head. So these great prophetic, if you like, embodiments show us that this is how it is. A being is practiced for so many years to be he or she as he or she is. You can't deny that. But he or she only exists because of that cosmic light, which is beyond boundaries and limitations and manifestations. If you just take the arwah, just take the millions of different types of souls. It moves from the big animal, the dinosaurs that have become extinct, and moves on, and all of the other creatures, the billions of them. And then the tinier ones. What about the bacteria? What about the virus? They are worshipping life in their own way. كل يعمل على شاكلته. And here we wage war against everything. No, we have to acknowledge the obsession with life within one's own self. But you are here a very limited guardian or a steward to maintain the balance. You're not here to destroy all of these things, eradicate this, eradicate that, overwhelm this, overwhelm. It's not your responsibility. You don't know what is the outcome. That's why things like modification of genetic modification, we have no clue as to what it comes. Prolonged life, make the ear bigger, make the nose smaller. But what are the other outcomes? We are playing God without having in any way truly began to worship God. So we are really like, children given all kinds of ammunitions and warheads that are far beyond our ability to comprehend their outcome upon ourselves. So that's why I say we are in a very, very dark period, but we'll have to come out of it. Or that's the last extinction. Either way, it's all right. Life will continue. So we have no fear.
Thank you, Shaykh. I want to ask you to please reflect on a Hadith al-Qudsi where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am in my servant's opinion of me. Can you please reflect on this and tell us what it might mean for our spiritual paths?
My opinion of Allah has changed a lot. My opinion of Allah as I was maybe 2 years old was that he was a greater mama than my mama. And maybe 5, 6 years old, greater Baba than my, and on and on and on. So it changed until I was fortunate enough to be able to switch off the so-called I and consciousness, conditioned consciousness of myself. And that's the purpose of Salah. That's the purpose of all worship. To lose yourself in the focus point, lose yourself in the absolute, or in that which is not describable, away from anything that is limited, definable, and is subject to space and time. Not until we can do that regularly, we cannot recalibrate the so-called self, the conditioned self, the ego self, the memory self, the biographical self, and the soul in me. Not until I am able to transcend the so-called I cannot truly feel the energy of the real divine presence. When that begins to happen, then you are, in a way, speechless, mindless, thoughtless, because now the limited is in touch with the limitless. Physical reality is in touch with the absolute or the quantum reality. So you are now, if you like, at that point of knowing without knowing. Knowing that there is this entity in charge, but you don't know the entity because you can't contain it. Knowledge means aql. Aql is to contain. I've grasped it. You can't grasp it. You know you have been grasped. So that is why in the Sufi path or in the spiritual path, there comes a point that you must lose every notion that you held to be important. You have to lose all. And then you find he who has it all has you also as part of that total cosmic package. If we talk about liberation theology or freedom or whatever, this is what it means. You're free of the illusion of exercising freedom. Otherwise, we end up as where we are. You want more money, so you can act exactly as you want. I throw more money at it and I kill them all, or change the whole country, drop the whole. So this is the ultimate arrogance in which so many of our so-called political leaders have ended up being the worst, misleading beings on earth. Because they cannot survive anymore with modesty. Because the lower population that elects them expects them to be like demigods. You know, they're not just magic makers. They're now miracle makers. Impossible. So the poor fellow ends up into that leadership ladder. He's actually signing his death sentence by themselves. It reminds me of in Iraq, it's a very unimportant part of the Ottoman Empire. There wasn't much money, so there wasn't much taxation. So it was insignificant. Anyway, and usually the last wali would be deposed with disgrace. So the last wali was being dragged in the streets of Baghdad, bleeding, and the new wali arrived on a huge, big, beautiful white horse with his entourage. The wilaya has to be about 4 or 5 years, but usually it ended by about 2 or 3. So this man with 2 bags of gold rushes to this new wali. He says, this gold is for you. He said, but why? How come? I've just arrived in the country. He said, no, it's the will of my father. And so nobody refuses gold. Says, later on I find out why. So he took it. And he said, look, my father died saying this belongs to the most foolish person on earth, not you. So I think you are the most foolish person on earth. You can see in front of you, what is your end? Look at the past wali. He's being dragged in the street, being cut to pieces, and here you are proud that you have come into his place. So you deserve that. So the same thing soon, I think we have to do the same thing to any political leader. They are supposed to play magic. Therefore, the tricks are lies, deceptions, illusions, and delusions. That's why there is suffering at every level. That's it. We have to see that also for what it is, and it's happening now with social media, with accessibility, with the rise of intelligence. We're seeing the whole thing is a lie. So honesty, that the so-called I is fickle, unreliable, changes, deceives, constant deception to survive. Every now and then you redo your CV. You reinvented yourself now in order to survive, because you're obsessed with life. And you've imagined your life is your body, so you're obsessed. But look at the other story, the other end of it. Imam Hussein, all his people have died, 70 odd people with him. The last thing is the baby is now dead at his foot. He still stands up with his arrow, with the enemy thousands in front of him. Teaching of the Prophet is, even if it is the day of reckoning, and you have a palm baby in your hand, plant it. It's not your business. Your business is what's in your hand. He had one arrow, I shoot it. Meaning that he's no longer the him, save me, run away. Him become the nur of God, perfect justice in his own heart. That's why the love of Imam Hussein and these things are ever increasing, because the reference is the absolute, not the relative. Without that reference, there is no security. With that reference, then you read, Wal asri innal insana lafi khusr, but you are an insan and Rahman and Rawhan and Rayhan. So that is far more powerful. But it is a ladder, and you have to be honest where you are on the ladder. You mustn't concoct. For a child, we ask them to pretend to be generous. Eventually, they end up being generous because they will enjoy the feeling of the acknowledgement and the gratitude of being generous. So you have to cheat the lower self, cheat the shaitan in you by the nur of the Rahman in you. So it's balanced until such time you find there is only the nur of Rahman. And the shaitan was the dark side of it too. It was needed to suffer from.
Thank you, Shaykh. I have just one concluding question. That was an extraordinary response. The idea of standing up in the last moment to do the right thing, as long as it's calibrated to truth, is very powerful in this moment. Just where I started from in terms of my questions, that reference to truth and acting with just in the present moment. So thank you, Shaykh. My last question, in our previous conversation, you had a very beautiful phrase that you used. You said, let our spirituality and our Islam gently waft like a fragrance in our homes. So myself as a mother, many of us as parents, some of us that are teachers, sometimes become anxious when our children are not maybe performing their salah regularly or reciting the Arabic as well as they should in terms of their Quran, or any of the things that we want to teach and that we're anxious for them to learn. And so we often don't have them experience us and our teaching of Islam as a gentle fragrance. It sometimes comes across as fairly authoritarian. And so help us, Sheikh, to what are the 3 practices that you would recommend to a 21st century human being that wants to calibrate their lives and their beings with the gentle wafting of their Islam in their lives, in their homes, amongst their families, amongst the ones that are close to them? And I know we have a very short time, so perhaps Sheikh could end on that note.
Living duality, living the duality that each one of us is, with acknowledgement of eternal unity, that is the source of the life in us, which acknowledges duality. As a parent, you must express anxiety if the children don't behave themselves. For their sake, if you don't do it, If I was a child, I would consider you having abandoned me. How come you're not anxious that I'm not behaving well? Something is wrong. But in your own self, you're only here an agent or as a gardener for the divine presence. So within your own self, you have no bubbling, boiling, anxious, heated heart. But for their sake, express anger. But don't play around. So you're not, for their sake, you're angry because they are going to grow crooked. They're going to cause more crookedness, more injustice. But within your own heart, Allah is the doer. And you never know, He may make more mistakes so they suffer more. But as a parent, you want a gentle movement. So this is honesty. For their sake, I am anxious, I am concerned, I am upset. For God's sake, God is the doer. There is only that sake. So within my own heart, I am tranquil. Otherwise, I will make more mistakes then. I become more hot-headed and so on, and it becomes a game. Then they play with me all the time. They will enjoy me being hot-headed. Stupid. We are two. You are carrier of the divine light and liver as the bovine evolved creature ending up as a human being.
Subhanallah. Dr. Sadiyya, thank you for these probing and penetrating questions. Thank you, Shaykh Fadhlalla, for blowing us away with your answers, some of which were challenging to wrap our minds around. You are asking of us to look at things from the absolute, and we are still looking at things from the perspective, from deep down in the valley, from the relative. But really, you have, both of you, through this journey today, have mapped out how to live duality while acknowledging the eternal unity. And I hope and pray that we can all find our way to realizing that, for in truth, it does seem that there lies bliss and true inner liberation. Thank you so much for all of this. Thank you for joining us today, and watch this space for further announcements of other conversations in these uncommon dialogues. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bless you all. Thank you to the team as well. Much gratitude.